Hey guys, today I'm going to go through like a more advanced, more complete tutorial for tuning your car because I don't think that I've covered the tuning process to quite the level of depth that I think most people need to be able to do it from A to Z without getting stuck. And also I'm going to cover like a lot more of the advanced tuning techniques that really help you get like the most value out of your tune as opposed to just your most basic tune. I mean, basic tunes will help your car drive better. You might pick up a few horsepower in the single digits just from your car running better and all that, and maybe getting some extra timing, which is great. I mean, that's where you start. But ultimately, you want to get the maximum amount of horsepower, and until you're getting into like forced induction and superchargers and stuff like that, really the tuning process is all you have to get your naturally aspirated vehicle, to produce the maximum power. So that's what we're going to cover today. And important thing, if you're a subscriber of my channel, then I'll give you a copy of all the example files and everything that I'm using today. So that goes for like the HPTuners layout that I use, the Excel files that I use to manipulate data and such. So you can have a copy of that, and that'll help you sort of follow along with this video, and you'll be able to sort of use these resources to do your own tune. Now, just sort of a disclaimer, I'd like to cover every possible tuning scenario, but unfortunately automotive is such a huge topic. There's just so many cars out there. The setups are completely different, and I can't cover all of that in one video. And also, the other problem that's limiting me is that I only have access to the cars that I own. So in this case, I'm using a 2013 Camaro SS with the V8 engine in it, but it's naturally aspirated at the moment. So really, I'm focusing on getting the maximum tune out of your naturally aspirated car. With a pushrod type engine, very low feature set. Which is kind of like the base starting point anyway. I mean, I think that's a good place to start. You don't want to get too into specifics about turbos and stuff like that if it doesn't apply to you. But a lot of people have naturally aspirated cars, muscle cars in particular. I think Camaros are fairly common, Mustangs and Challengers and such. So hopefully this video will pertain directly to a lot of customers, and if it doesn't, you can still use it as a starting point for your supercharged application. So the first thing that you need to do when you're dealing with a car like a Camaro, for example, is to, in my case, I'm running my car in open loop, and what that means is I'm not relying on the oxygen sensors to feed back information about the fuel ratio to the computer so that the computer can compensate for the fuel. I'm using a lookup table, and the lookup table is like the Bible. The computer will follow the lookup table and apply exactly as much fuel as the table tells it to, regardless of what the O2 sensors are reporting back. And you might think, oh, well, that's stupid. Why would you do that? I mean, the O2 sensors are giving you information that you can use and all that. Well, here's the reason why you do that. The O2 sensors work like in a normal car. The O2 sensors work in kind of a weird way. Like they don't actually measure the air-fuel ratio. What they do is they measure whether the car is running rich or whether it's running lean. It's kind of a dummy sensor. It doesn't know what the ratio is. It just knows whether it's rich or lean. So if it's rich, it says, okay, go leaner. If it's lean, it says, okay, go richer. So what you're constantly getting, if you install a wideband O2 sensor into your car, what you'll be noticing is that your air-fuel ratio is constantly going up, down, up, down, up, down, and it's like doing this seesaw thing back and forth over stoichiometric, which just means that your fuel is kind of all over the place all the time within a small error. Using an open loop system, what that does is it says, here's the amount of fuel to apply, and just do it, and don't listen to anything else. So what that does is it gives you a very steady, very stable and consistent AFR at a given load point, and it will never change. I mean, that really gives you the maximum level of control over your fuel. The only caveat to that is you have to be really precise about it because it's listening only to the lookup table. So if the lookup table is wrong, your fuel is going to be wrong, and there's no way to correct it. So you need to be very good at, well, you need to tune your car up very good before it will operate at its maximum, right? But it's just a little bit more work, but the rewards pay it for themselves. So first step is to get it into, so first thing you need to do is actually upgrade your HPTuners OS for your car, your operating system for your car, because normally the stock operating system that comes with the car from the factory has a very pathetic open loop table. The table doesn't have very much resolution, and I can show you what I mean here. If we go to airflow main VE table, this is the volumetric efficiency table. So this is your open loop table, right? Go to normal IMRC closed, and you'll notice, this is the upgraded table, so you can see how many cells there are. It's a huge number of cells. So you've got all your manifold pressures on the top here. You've got all your RPMs on the bottom, on the side axis here. And look at the resolution. It's every 200 RPMs. It's every 5 kilopascals, and it goes into boost as well. So it goes all the way up to 175, which is about, almost 2 atmospheres, like 1 3/4 bar, which is good enough for most people. You can get tables that go even further than that. They're upgrade options from HPTuners, so you have to go and consult the HPTuners website when you buy their product, and apply the upgrade that is available for your car, which gives you the table that you need. But basically, the resolution of this is enormous. You've got, I don't know how many cells here, probably somewhere between 20 and 30 cells here, and probably almost 20 cells in this direction. So you're talking hundreds of points that represent different load conditions that your car is going through at any particular point in time, right? And each of these can have like a fuel value assigned to it, so your car has like the most precise level of control over your fueling. And if you tune that in, you are gold, and you are set. And that will never change either, unless you change something physical on your car, something that affects the airflow or the fuel somehow. As long as the car remains physically the same, it's not going to creep as a result of sensor degradation, like what happened with a mass airflow sensor. Sometimes the mass airflow sensor gets coated with dirt or oil, and the readings will start to creep, and you'll have to continually calibrate it all the time. That doesn't happen with this type of an open loop system. And just for curiosity's sake, let's take a look at the mass airflow table. This is the mass airflow table. You can tell it's a single axis table. And though it does appear to have a lot of points on it, it's probably got maybe 30, 40 points on it. It's just one axis. So that's all you get. Just 30, 40 points. Let's say 50. Let's be generous and say it's got 50 points. That's all you get. It compresses all of the RPM and pressure data into this one-dimensional table. And this is how all cars work by default, or most cars anyway. They usually rely on this type of a sensor, and it's okay for your daily driver, but it's really not okay for your performance car. So you want to get rid of that ASAP and go to your VE table. But like I said before, even the VE table is considerably smaller than this until you upgrade it. So that's what you want to do first. And then the next step is, of course, to set the computer so that it will always use open loop. And that's a little bit more tricky until you find the setting that does that. So I think it's under, where is it? Here we go. So under oxygen sensors, I guess, yeah, it says closed loop enable. So this tells the computer when to go into closed loop. And the reason for that is when you start the car up, the car's cold, and the oxygen sensors don't work efficiently at low temperature. They only work well once they've heated up. So usually the car will have a delay that's based on engine temperature and also just based on time, and it uses an algorithm to decide, okay, when's the appropriate time to enter closed loop mode. So to be honest, there really is no way to turn off closed loop that I've found. But you can effectively turn it off by just introducing a huge delay. You can see here I've got 32,500 seconds, which is literally the biggest number that you can pick for the variable that stores this number. It only goes that high. So that, I don't know what that is. That 32,000, divide that by 60 seconds and it'll give you how many minutes. Most people wouldn't drive their car for hours and hours and hours, in one session anyway. So this is going to do you for 99.9% of your situations. Unless you're driving across the country and you've got your car on the whole time and you're driving for 20 hours straight, your car should never enter closed loop. So this effectively turns off closed loop, and that's what you want to do. Then the car will rely exclusively on your open loop table or your VE table, which as I said, is under the airflow tab here. So this is what you want, and tuning this is a little bit tricky because, first of all, you're not tuning fuel values directly. These are not fuel values. These are volumetric efficiency numbers, and they don't really have any particular meaning either. They're kind of unitless. They kind of don't have any physical meaning. They're just numbers that GM correlates to the efficiency of your engine, and the efficiency of your engine is directly tied to how much fuel it needs. So if you increase the size of these numbers, it's going to command more fuel. So basically, if you pick a cell like this one over here, at 50 kilopascals and 2000 RPM, it says 1857, whatever that is. So if you go and log your vehicle during a road scan, and you determine that cell is lean by, it's like you would have to have a wideband. That's the other prerequisite to doing this properly. You can use LTFT values, but I don't recommend it. I think wideband is really the only way to go to do this properly. So you would use your wideband sensor to log the same resolution of data that's in this table, and you would find that this cell here is maybe lean by, a couple tenths of a point, right? So what you need to do is figure out a way to inflate this number to deliver more fuel to compensate for those 2/10 of a point. And that's a little bit of an art. You kind of have to figure out how much of a change will yield how much of a percentage change on this volumetric efficiency table, but that's the exercise you have to go through. And once you determine that correction factor, then you can just sort of apply it across the board. And I'll show you how to do that later in specifics. But right now, I'm just sort of walking you through the process that this is what you have to do, right? And then there's other things that you have to consider too. But before I get into all that complexity, let's take a look at the road scanning part of it. So here is your HPTuners, your VCM scanner. So what you have to do is set up your tables first of all to do your road scan, because until you do this part, you're not going to be collecting the data that you need. So I've set these tables up in a similar fashion. Most of them anyway have been set up to resemble the volumetric efficiency table. They've got the same axes and they've got the same resolution. So you can see that I've got, for my spark table, for example, I've got RPM running along the top and pressure running along the side. I find that the way this looks is more ergonomic. It's more user friendly for me to look at it this way. It doesn't really matter if you swap the rows and the columns. Like, let me just check real quick, because I think, yeah. So in the VE table in the tuner program, you've got pressure running along the top, right? And in mine, you've got RPM running along the top. That's okay. You can do that. Later on, you're going to need to transpose the data, and transpose simply means you swap the columns and the rows so that it mirrors itself to look like the VE table. You're going to need to do that so that you can import the data that you took from your log into your tune. But for the sake of tuning, you can have it look like this. If you don't want it to look like this, you can do it the other way, and then you can skip a step of, not having to transpose the data. But I like to look at it this way because I like to see RPMs go left to right, and I like to see pressure go up to down. It's just the way my brain works. So, so you've got so it's very important that you get all of your column headers and your row headers to match exactly the number of columns and the number of rows and the labels for each. Everything has to match the table that you're going to be modifying. So if you're modifying your VE table, make sure that your columns and your rows have the exact same numbers on them and the same number of rows and columns as your VE table does. You don't necessarily have to go, like my VE table goes up to 175 kilopascals, so you don't have to go up to 175 kilopascals if you don't want to, but just remember that when you copy the data over, you're only going to be overwriting a portion of the table, and the portion that you are missing here is not going to overwrite on the other table. So not that I mean to say it has to be exactly the same, but at least the resolution, like the increments of 5 and the increments of 200 here, they have to be exactly the same. And you need to at least know what rows you've got so that you know where to paste it. You don't want to be pasting things in the wrong place. That's all I'm saying. So anyway, I can go into so here I've got, let's just go over the main categories that I'm logging here. So I've got Spark. Spark is important because a lot of your power will come from advancing your Spark. So it's good to know what that is. Spark retard or knock retard, I should say. Very, very, very important to have that. It tells you if you're experiencing engine problems in any of your cells, and that could be related to a whole bunch of different things. You'd have to diagnose that and figure out whether it's coming from the fuel ratio being off, the spark being too advanced, maybe the onset of fuel, the acceleration enrichment, to use an old term, is not coming on fast enough. So in that case, you might want to look at your oxygen sensor values to see if they're going lean when you hit the throttle. Anything can cause knock. Even mechanical problems in your exhaust pipe, having a restrictive exhaust can cause it too. Clogged up catalytic converter, many things. But you need to have this table. And again, this has the same layout as your VE table. Mass airflow, I'm not going to be using it for my car, but it's nice to have it. You never know when you're going to want to refer to this. It's always nice to have the MAF table. Wideband O2, this is really this is like the core of your tune right here. This is the table you're going to be using the most heavily. This is where you have your sensor, your wideband O2, your AEM or whatever brand of wideband O2 you bought that's plugged into your exhaust pipe. It should have a diagnostic cable that you can connect directly to your HPTuner module through the A to D inputs. If you bought the HPTuner Pro, it will have that little green terminal block on it that you can plug wires into. So your wideband O2 will have two wires, a signal and a ground, and you plug that into your signal and ground, channel 1 for example, and ground on your HPTuner, and then you will start to get values come in. Now, bear in mind, the values you get from the gauge are not going to be air fuel values like this. They're going to be voltages. It's just a raw voltage that you're going to get. And there's a transfer function that comes with the product. It's in the instruction manual, and you can also find it online too, and I'll show you that later, which converts that voltage into an air fuel value. So what I have on this table is actually a math function that I've defined already that has the transfer function in it, and it translates everything into AFR. We'll get to that in a minute. Temperature, this is kind of an obscure table that you don't really need, but I think that it's probably really good to have this. So let me explain what this does. This doesn't have the same layout as the other tables, by the way, because you're not meant to just copy paste this into your VE table or anything like that. But here's what this does. So for any given RPM, and you can see that I've got each RPM defined on the top, I've got different temperatures in Kelvin, which is the way that it's reported, in the PID. So let's say that you're driving along, you just start your car up and you leave your driveway, and you're flirting with 2,000 RPM as you throttle up and down, and your engine's your intake is still cold, so you're going to get an AFR value from your wideband when your engine is kind of cold. Later on, after you've been driving for an hour, you're still throttling up and down at stoplights and such, and you're going through 2,000 RPM, but now your AFR is different. So what this means is, even though the load point is exactly the same, you would have a different AFR associated with that, based strictly on temperature. So why is that, right? Well, as an engine heats up, the properties of the fuel change. The atomized fuel becomes more, the volatility of the fuel increases, like it becomes more of a vapor, so you need less of it. And sometimes this can enhance your combustion, make it easier for the combustion to take place. So you need less fuel, and this can affect your AFR. Basically just saying that, temperature has an effect on AFR independent of anything else. So it's a good idea to log, the AFR as a function of temperature at each RPM. And this way you can graph, like you can highlight a column like this at 1600 RPM, for example. You can highlight the column, throw it in Excel, graph it, and see if there's any kind of a pattern to it. If it's like, if you do a linear interpolation on it, for example, you put a trend line on there, a linear trend line. If it's got a slant to it, if it's got like a slope that it seems to be richening, or leaning out with increasing temperature, then there's a table for that in your tune, where you can actually correct for it. And it has nothing to do with any other variables. It just corrects for temperature only. So this is kind of like a fourth dimension on top of your VE table, because your VE table is already three-dimensional. It's already a surface plot that's based on pressure and RPM, giving you your VE. But another dimension on top of that is temperature. So you can add like another factor on top of that, and that gives you even more precision. So not only is your car going to work in the summertime, it's going to work in the wintertime too, or in any temperature condition, any engine temperature condition, it'll work. Okay, so then throttle, there's actually a table for this too, where throttle is sort of, the dependent variable that affects your air fuel ratio. But I don't like to use this. I just threw it in here just for the sake of academics, but I don't use it because throttle is so closely tied to manifold pressure. When you increase your throttle angle, you're increasing your manifold pressure. Manifold pressure is already incorporated into your VE table. So I would much rather use that as a variable than throttle. But it's nice to have this table just sort of to look at. Now, flow capacity is something I kind of invented on my own. It doesn't mean anything to anybody else. This is just something that I made up, and I think it's kind of important for me personally, in my experience. And here's how it works. It's basically, on the top here, you've got all your mass airflow frequency values. This is what the mass airflow sensor actually reports when it's operating. It gives you a frequency, and the frequency is tied to a flow. So the more air flowing through the mass airflow tube, the higher the frequency it's going to report. Now, for each of those frequencies, I have basically an average of what RPM does the car tend to be at when it's reaching that value of flow. So if you can sort of follow my train of thought on this, what I was trying to do is establish at what point the airflow through the engine is sort of bottlenecked or restricted. Because if you've seen Engine Masters or any of those Motor Trend shows, they talk about the breathability of your engine affecting performance at the top end. So if your intake tube or your intake runners or your whatever, any part of your intake tract is restricted, then there's going to be a maximum flow that it can handle, and beyond that it's just going to choke. so you're going to lose power. So usually what you'll see is when you do a wide open throttle run, you'll blast through all your RPMs from a standstill. You'll just hit the gas, and you'll go from 0 all the way up to, let's say, 6,500 RPM, 7,000 RPM, something like that. And if you were to dyno your car, doing that kind of a watt run, you'd probably notice that your torque will fall off at a certain point before you reach maximum RPM. Maybe around 5,000, your torque will start to drop off, and then your horsepower will also drop off before it hits maximum RPM too, indicating that you're really not making anything. So there's no point in shifting that high. Unless you're getting some real good mechanical advantage from your transmission, there's really no point in shifting any higher than your torque curve and your horsepower curve are increasing. So what you really want to know, without having access to a dyno, and most people don't have the benefit of just throwing their car up on a dyno. So what you want to know is, when is my car choking out? So what I was hoping that this table would allow me to do, and you can't see it from this particular tune because this is just a crappy 2-second tune that I did just to get some data on the board to show you, but you need a full tune, like with all the cells like fully populated to get I didn't get high enough into the RPMs to show you, but let's say that I managed to get 8,100 hertz, which represents the maximum flow through the pipe, right? So where is that 8,100 hertz? Where is that occurring? Is it occurring at 4,000 RPM? Is it occurring at 6,000 RPM? Normally what you would see is, you'd see the numbers would increase like they are, but then it's going to roll over, and you're going to see that it's actually decreasing. So 8,100 RPM might only correspond to 4,000 RPM. Sorry, 8,100. I keep saying RPM. 8,100 hertz from your MAF sensor might only correspond to 4,000 RPM in your car, indicating that your car is breathing at maximum volumetric efficiency at that RPM level. That's where you get your maximum flow, at 4,000 RPM. So if you go back and back and back and you see, okay, where is 6,000 RPM? Where is my car redlining at? You might see that it's way back here at 6,900 hertz or something like this. So what that tells you is that between 4,000 and 6,000 RPM, you're losing airflow, because your airflow is actually going backwards. So this is kind of what this table tells you, in lieu of having a proper dyno to give you the actual curve. It kind of gives you a guess at that. And what that helps you do is it helps you set your shift points. If you want to, if you're driving a manual, it tells you where you should be shifting. If you're driving an automatic, you can go to the transmission section of your tune and change your shift points based on this. So this is kind of handy, I think, to have. So let's get to now the details of what PIDs you need to scan, and how the tables are actually defined in the HPTuners program. And then you'll be able to set up the tables yourself, and you'll be able to scan all the right PIDs from your car, because the tables won't work unless you're scanning the PIDs that the tables require. It's one of those things about HPT that I don't really like, is that you can actually construct all the charts, just the way I tell you to, and then it still won't work, because unless you've actually added the PIDs in the left-hand column, it's trying to pull a value that is actually not being scanned, or it's trying to graph something that was never pulled and it was never scanned. So you have to make sure that you're logging the PID first, and then that your graphs are using those exact PIDs. So we'll get through all of that one at a time here. I'll show you how to set the chart up, and then we can move on to the next step, which is, of course, getting ready to actually drive the car and scan it.